Hi, my name is Dodge Landisman, and I'm a student at Emerson College. I'm a graduate student, and I've been going to New Hampshire a handful of times to really check out these candidates and see what they're saying. I had a video in the past about Kirsten Gillibrand, and as I said in the video in the past, I think what's really important is that we get more than just sound bites from what these candidates are saying, that we actually get to hear their whole speeches and really figure out what it is they're all about. Because I think so many candidates by the mainstream media are often quoted out of context, and it's important to really get to the meat of what they're saying to prove what they're all about. So one of the candidates that I focused on this past weekend, I had the opportunity to actually visit 4 different candidates. But I want to start with my video about Tulsi Gabbard, because I really do think there's some urgency here. And the urgency is there's so many misconceptions about what the Hawaii Congresswoman is all about. There's a lot of criticism about her from her stances on LGBT issues, from also meeting with Assad. And I think her speech in North Hampton, her town hall, which is very well attended, clarifies a lot of those concerns. So I think that's really important to actually put up a video, and instead of just having a 1 or 2 minute clip, actually have her full 20-minute speech. So after I'm done speaking, you'll be able to go to her speech. You could certainly fast forward if you'd like. And I'm personally quite a big fan of Tulsi Gabbard's, actually. She's in my top 5. I've always been kind of a libertarian-leaning progressive. And I've always appreciated candidates that could move across the aisle, that have alliances with the other party, because what that indicates is that if Tulsi were president, she would have those connections to actually pass meaningful legislation. You look at candidates like Bernie, you look at some of the more combative candidates, and they're amazing in what they stand for, but you really do wonder, even with the Democratic Congress, can they pass all that they want to pass? And I'm thinking at the top of my head that that might be an issue. So I really like about what she advocates for, that her number 1 policy is anti-foreign intervention. And this is kind of how she addresses the Assad issue in her speech. She feels, and I think she could be pretty accurate in this, that America is on the brink of nuclear war. We're always one step away, that if we don't deal with our enemies delicately, if we don't try to meet with them and create solutions, then you never know, especially with such a volatile president like the one we have in office. The U.S. and foreign policy could essentially equate to a tinderbox. And I really like that Tulsi is really one of the only candidates to address this. She's very anti-intervention. She understands that we have so much money to take care of education, that we have so much money to maybe not, she doesn't say this, but maybe to not even raise taxes if we cut our military budget. She understands that we could address poverty and income inequality and food deserts and hunger issues pretty much simply by cutting a lot of the military budget. And it's interesting because you look at the other candidates, you analyze them, and they're not talking about foreign policy. They're progressive on so many other issues, which is important, but none of them make anti-foreign intervention a part of what they're saying. And that's because, unfortunately, even though I have 4 other candidates in my top 5 and I like them, I think every single candidate, aside from Tulsi Gabbard, has bought into this industrial military complex, the same industrial military complex that former President Dwight Eisenhower warned us about, that Kennedy also warned us about before his death. It is alive and well. It has gotten worse post 9/11. It has gotten worse under the Bush administration, worse under the Obama administration, and even worse under the Trump administration. So no president really in the latter half of the 20th century or in the 21st century has really stood in opposition to this. You could say at face value that Trump pulling the troops out of Syria addresses this, but I don't think so. I think it goes a lot deeper than that. So that's Tulsi's biggest advocacy. And she always remarks that the biggest domestic issue in the United States is foreign intervention, because if we have no home to live in, then there are no more domestic policy issues to address. It makes me think of what people say about climate change. It's very similar. If we have no Earth, then all of the other domestic policies are inconsequential. So Tulsi addressed this. She addressed meeting with Assad. First, what she remarked is that she did it as a congresswoman. She didn't represent any of the government or anything like that. And she was essentially on a fact-finding mission. And if you want to be an expert on being opposed to foreign intervention and you want to have the credibility so people could trust what you're talking about, what you're advocating for, then you need to meet with as many people as you can. Tulsi met with soldiers, she met with people involved, and yes, she had also met with Assad personally. And what Tulsi equates this to is, if you look through history, a lot of our great leaders have met with, unfortunately, world's leaders that we're opposed to, that have also been responsible for a substantial amount of deaths. And I understand that there are some moral qualms about this. Assad is a murderer, there's no question about it. He's killed innocent people, but Tulsi also refers to the relationship of Nikita Khrushchev of Russia in the 1960s, as well as the 1950s with Eisenhower, but the relationship of Khrushchev in Russia with Kennedy in the 60s as well, that it ended up being a positive relationship. And of course, with the famous Cuban Missile Crisis, when the United States was on the brink of war and on the brink of creating nuclear war with Russia, it was that direct communication that Khrushchev and Kennedy had that stopped the Cuban Missile Crisis and really stopped World War III. So if Kennedy didn't have the same policy that Tulsi Gabbard has now, I don't think I'd be talking to you today. I don't think you'd be listening to this video today. I don't think there'd be an America today as we know it. So I give Kennedy a lot of credit for it, and I give Tulsi a lot of credit for her position. It's a bold position. It shows that she has guts, because she knew she would take a lot of guff from this. But her decision was, I want to be the best Congresswoman I can be. I want to be as informed as possible, and that's what she did. Some other issues about her LGBT votes, I think this is where you have to analyze Tulsi's character. One of the reservations a lot of people have is that her father was this hardcore Hindu nationalist, and he supported a violent Hindu nationalist group. Gabbard later worked in a group in sort of conjunction, wasn't direct associated with it, but in conjunction with that group that was openly anti-LGBT. When she was very young, about 21 in the state legislature, she also voted against LGBT legislation and also expressed her opposition to marriage equality. Now fast forward to the moment that she gets elected to Congress, I think Gabbard finally shed the shadow of her father. And you should not blame the child for the sins of thy father. That is a fundamental rule that voters should really factor into, because I think it took her some time to grow out of the shadow, but I think she has 100% done so. 100% of her votes on LGBT issues within Congress have been pro-LGBT. She has gone to many events. She has advocated with leaders. She has gone out of her way to make sure that the LGBT community stands in solidarity with her and that she stands in solidarity with them. So to me, that's all the proof I need. And I think because of that, because of how she's addressed these issues, I think she'd really quite make an excellent president. I think she's incredibly honest. I think she's done some things in terms of research with Syria that would antagonize her to some progressives, but she moves and she leads and she acts with her heart, which is, I think, something unique in this Democratic 2020 race and something that we should really respect Gabbard on. I think she's been very unfairly treated, and I think she'd be one of the most viable candidates against Trump. A little more moderate, a bit of a bridge builder, understands a bigger picture of being anti-industrial military complex, and she is that essential anti-machine, anti-establishment candidate. I give her a lot of credit during the 2016 election when she resigns as vice chair, a very powerful position, a position that so many local politicians use to step up to statewide office or to more impressive positions. And she resigned from it to endorse Bernie and to cry foul about this nominating process that was occurring in 2016. To me, that took so much guts. And I think, especially after Hillary Clinton, and especially after her shocking loss to Trump, what voters really hunger for is a candidate who doesn't toe the party line necessarily. Yes, they have to be a progressive and have to be liberal in what they believe and what they believe in their heart, but they don't have to toe the establishment party line. And Gabbard never did that. She went out of her way to decry the process and to really speak truth to power. And that's a very scary thing to do. That's something that will lose you a lot of support, but she did it because she felt like a lot of the supporters of Bernie Sanders were being fleeced, that this was a rigged process. And I agree with her, and I think so many candidates agree with her. I could see so many of those Bernie supporters that might have not voted, and that might have been 2 to 3% in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and Wisconsin, these other states that Trump surprisingly won. I could see them thinking, okay, Tulsi Gabbard is not a political hack. She's not in bed with the corporations. She's not in bed with the weapons manufacturers because she keeps advocating against foreign intervention. She wants to focus on domestic policy and how our needs could be addressed. And she thinks for herself. And she's not your typical machine Democrat. You know, people think that machine politics died in Kansas City or with Boss Tweed in New York City over a century ago, but it is still very much alive and well. And not only that, but it's changed from local to becoming nationalized. And very few of these candidates kind of recognize that and want to fight against it. Some don't want to take any corporate PAC money. That's something I respect from Mr. Booker. That's something I respect from Mrs. Gillibrand. But at the same time, that's great, but then they haven't said, well, they won't take any support from weapons manufacturers. They won't accept any endorsements from particularly hawkish Democrats, whatever it might be. So on the foreign policy, it's disappointing to me. But if you look at a lot of what the Democrats are about, they're regressive instead of progressive. And Tulsi distinguishes herself. Now, I've said a lot of nice things about Tulsi, and there's a lot that I really like about her. But now I think, unfortunately, we have to go into the negatives, because one of the reasons I'm going to New Hampshire is, in addition to saying what I like and what I don't like about their policy, is also looking at how they present themselves to the voters. Are they charismatic? Can they inspire people? Do they have the passion? Because I hate to say it, but that is equally as important as how are their policies. We need somebody to defeat Trump. We need a viable candidate. I've listed all the reasons why she's anti-machine, how she's so different, that she would be very viable against Trump. She's a very attractive candidate, but it's also, I was disappointed by her performance in New Hampshire. She was really, to put it frankly, boring, and you'll be able to see that from her speech. There was no soaring oratory. There was no urgency in her voice. There was no excitement, there was no passion, there was no call to action, and she took a few questions, then quickly left. If you compare Cory Booker, for example, I went to his event earlier. Cory Booker stayed for 2 hours after the event, took a photo with every person, talked with everybody, and he really made sure to say, hey, like, I'm not just here to make a speech, but I'm here to get to know you. And Tulsi just took out of there. And again, her speech was just lackluster. I'm hoping that this could change. A candidate can learn a lot on the campaign trail. They can feed off that energy from people. They can learn how to be better, how to be more dynamic. For some, it's not natural. For some, they could actually be able to develop it. For some, they can't. And they're just so low key that they can't add that excitement to their voice, that they can't make it a little higher on an important point where they can indicate their passion. And I don't know if Tulsi has that capability. I almost felt like I was falling asleep. Again, incredibly poised, knew what she was talking about, very well spoken, all of those good things. But I'm deeply concerned that if we have somebody so lackluster and so low key, that Trump will just walk all over them. And I don't know if I also see Tulsi as a fighter. You know, you compare her to some other candidates like Elizabeth Warren, who's been back and forth with Trump. Now, of course, she's a U.S. senator, so she is more famous, and so, of course, therefore, she'd have a lot of more interactions with Trump. But, she knows how to get to his jugular and piss him off. And I don't know if Tulsi knows how to do that. I don't know if she knows how to really stick it to somebody in their face and say, this is why you're wrong in X, Y, and Z. The fundamental word for Tulsi in her presentation style, which deeply concerns me, is that she is just so incredibly passive. She is the most passive candidate out of all 7 of them that I have seen. So I like Tulsi a lot. She's still in my top 5. Unfortunately, actually visiting her made me like her less than I did before. Because before I was almost 100% on Team Tulsi. And then I came and saw her speak, and I thought, do people see leadership qualities in her? Can people be inspired by her? And unfortunately, at the moment, I don't see people being inspired by Tulsi. I'm hoping that will change. I'm hoping that as she gets more used to this, that she could take her message in a more energetic fashion. So I do have hope. Who knows what could happen? But again, to wrap up, I think a lot of Tulsi's criticisms are unfair. She has the credibility. She's been against the industrial military complex. She wants peace in our nation. She wants to keep us from war. She wants to keep our citizenry from harm. And she's the only one with the legislative record and legislative accomplishment that shows that she's actually been trying to do that, and that she will continue to do that in the presidency. So I wish her luck, and I hope for improvement.
about often enough. And that is the issue of regime change wars, new Cold War that we find ourselves in. There's two reasons. One is because of the trillions of dollars that we spend on these regime change wars, on this new nuclear arms race. It's largely been kicked off because of President Trump's withdrawing from the INF Treaty, rather than strengthening this historic agreement that was negotiated by Reagan and Gorbachev to bring our country and the world away from the abyss of nuclear war. Rather than strengthening and expanding this important treaty, President Trump has chosen to walk away, kicking off a new nuclear arms race. So these trillions of dollars that are being spent on these wars are dollars that are coming out of every single one of our pockets. Dollars that are not going to invest in our children's education. That are not going to making sure that every one of us has clean water to drink. They're not going to our infrastructure, not going to healthcare. What to speak of, the second reason, which is really the existential one, which is if there is a nuclear war, then we have no future. Now, in my generation, we didn't grow up with the duck and cover drills in school that some others may be familiar with. But in Hawaii a year ago, we went through something that made this reality of this threat all too clear. It was just over a year ago, about 1 million people in Hawaii got a text message on their cell phones. And that text message read, "Missile incoming, seek shelter immediately. This is not a drill." It was because the threat is real. The threat coming from North Korea, the nuclear weapons that exist there is real. And it's a threat not just for the people of Hawaii, but it's one that exists for all of us. It's just as real here in North Hampton today as it was for Hawaii a year ago. But I talk about this because this is serious. But it doesn't have to be this way. This is not the new norm or reality that we have to accept. We can and we must make this change. We must address this crisis that we're facing. And that's my commitment and my promise to you as your president and as your commander-in-chief, to end these regime change wars, to work to end this new Cold War, to walk us back away from this abyss of nuclear war, and to take those dollars, to take your taxpayer dollars, and to make sure that they are being used to meet the needs of our people, our communities, our homes, right here. We can do this. We must do this. And we do this through strong leadership. And we do this through a foreign policy that is based on cooperation, not conflict. We do this by building allies and partnerships in these areas of common interest. And there are many examples throughout our history that show what has been done in moments such as this. JFK and Khrushchev, with Reagan and Gorbachev, people and leaders in different countries who recognize that this is not just a serious threat for the people of the United States of America, it's a threat to our world. It's a threat to our future. Now, the challenges are great. This is not a simple snap your fingers and it's done and it's fixed. In order for us to bend the arc of history away from war and towards peace, we know that there are forces who are very invested in our country, continuing to remain in a state of perpetual war. And they will fight hard against our efforts. But they do not stand a chance when we, the people, decide that we won't take it anymore. And that we will stand united, that we will stand together with care for one another and with love for our country and for our future to bring about this change. this is the only way, this is the only thing that can make the change that we need to see. Now, sometimes people ask me, Tulsi, why do you talk about these issues of foreign policy? These are things happening in other places. Why don't you talk more about domestic issues? What is more domestic than our very existence? We must address these issues. This is about our lives, it's about our future, it's about our homes and our families. And it's about making sure that we have the resources that we need to meet those needs of our children, our loved ones, our parents, and our families. That's what I'm offering to do, is I'm offering to serve you as your president. Offering to serve you as your commander-in-chief. To bring those soldiers' values of service above self to the White House. And to join hands with each of you to lead our country to a better and brighter future for all. Thank you so much, everybody. I support and have supported legislation to audit the Fed. This isn't something that's moved through Congress, but it's something that I continue to support. I think gets to the heart of what you last said, the issue that you raised in the closing. Overall, as we look at economic policy, we again see the problem here is that this policy is not shaped around how we can best serve the people, how our middle class can be empowered, and how we stop this downward spiral of income inequality where the haves are becoming increasingly fewer and far more powerful, and the have-nots are ever increasing even more. The news that just came the other day about Amazon's tax bill last year being a big whopping zero, not only making over $11 billion in profits last year, but also getting a tax rebate. So they paid no taxes, and then they took some of our money on top to the tune of it was $180 million. How many of us here paid no taxes last year and then got money back? What kind of deal is that? Right. For one guy, Jeff Bezos. But this, as we look at shifting our overall economic policy, there are a lot of elements to this that have to do with tax policy, have to do with our debt and our deficit, have to do with trade deals. And for too long now, those policies, through both Democrat and Republican administrations, have faltered because they're focused on the corporate interests and the lobbyists who are sitting around the table helping to shape these policies, rather than the interests of the people. And as a result, we've gotten shafted every single time. So we've got to flip this thing on its head once again and make sure that as we look at how these policies need to change, because they do, we are putting the well-being of the people first.
Is the legalization of marijuana, and relates to criminal justice and race relations and things like that. Would you, if you were elected president on day one, sign a bill legalizing marijuana? Day one.
Hell yeah.
Or are you open to rescheduling because it doesn't make sense to schedule one drug?
Great question. Great question. I have, for a long time now, as a member of Congress, introduced legislation and led the push to end the federal marijuana prohibition. Period. Not to reschedule it, but to end the federal marijuana prohibition. And I believe in states' rights, and I think different states have passed different laws and rules and how they would like to how they're approaching this issue, but to have this constant threat of federal prosecution on states like mine and Hawaii, and many others, the vast majority of states in this country, have either legalized medicinal use of marijuana or some non-medicinal use. But because of this federal prohibition and this classification of marijuana as a Schedule I drug, small businesses, local community banks, and many others just through the course of doing their business, are under threat of federal prosecution. Even more so under the previous Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who out and out made these threats regularly. This change needs to take place. I am pushing for it in Congress, and I will bring about this change and work with Congress to make that happen as president. My father-in-law is a public high school teacher in Hawaii. He just turned 61 years old, and he is still paying off his college loans. So this is a story that's not unique or different. It's something that's causing and squashing and crushing the dreams of far too many people. I'm going to come out with a more detailed plan, but I want to address a few of the issues that I think surround this. One is the high interest rates around student loans, and the fact that whether it's the federal government or private banks, this should not be a for-profit venture, the education of our people. We have to address why the cost of education is skyrocketing and start to look at the root cause of this, whether it is in public institutions and especially private institutions. We have to look at how we are leveraging technology to create more access to higher education at little or no cost, and how we're addressing the vocational educational needs of people in our communities. There are a lot of folks who maybe don't choose the four-year degree path and instead would like to learn a skill. We have these needs in our community that need to be addressed and supported by our higher educational institutions. And the last thing I'll mention is we still have far too many people who are paying a lot of money for a great degree from a great school, and they graduate, they're not able to get a job in today's market. So the disconnect between our educational institutions and our employers and the job market is still too wide. So if we start to bring these elements together, bring people together so that there's some connectivity there, then I think we can start to see better outcomes. But we have to address each of these things in order to actually get to real solutions for this problem that's crushing so many people in difficult ways. Thank you.
President, what is your opinion about the Kurds? We just have wanted to run. We never attacked anybody. We wanted to just sleep, and we do a lot of run to the caves where the bombs come in and all our life and centuries. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I've met with Kurdish leaders from the northern part of Syria and heard directly from them and heard about their bravery and their courage in fighting against ISIS in Syria. Our troops have been deployed to Syria now for a few years to support the Kurds who have been the primary ground force fighting against ISIS. With our troops there to help provide support, to call in air support, and that fight is winding down. There are reports now of the Kurds, with our support, taking on some of the last ISIS strongholds in Syria. I've been a supporter of making sure that we are helping and providing that support to those Kurdish allies who've been trusted partners in this fight against the threat of ISIS. After that mission is complete, that our soldiers are there for, then we need to bring them home in a way that is responsible.